easy followers, and welcome back to the question where you have the questions and I have the answers. And today we're going to talk about Hamilton because it just got released to Disney Plus, which is super cool, like as a movie. It's one of my favorite musicals because I love history and I love how all the symbolism behind it and all the meaning behind it. But lately, there's been a lot of stigma around it. People are questioning whether presenting these questionably good people, in such a really good, happy light is a good thing or not, or if it's really damaging, because a lot of people who are watching it are taking like this at face value and being like, this is what happened, when clearly it's just a story, it's a musical. Obviously the founding fathers were not black or Asian American or Hispanic, and obviously they did a lot of worse things, but this is told from a different perspective. There's a story, there is a theme, there is a message that needs to be sent out, so it is skewed and told a certain way to highlight the good things about these characters, but that does not reflect on who the characters in history were. And to start, I think the message was that, because it's told from an immigrant perspective, it's told from Alexander Hamilton's perspective, and it's going to characterize the highlights and the follies, but it's going to of Hamilton, but it's mostly going to characterize, his impact on America. And that's the big message, is that immigrants do have an impact on America and they are important in creating America. I think that was the big message, especially having an all like person of color cast. Everyone was either black or Asian, Hispanic, Native. All of those people were, and I think that was a big message, is that our country was created by, the slaves and the people who were there, not just the founding fathers, but the people who worked under them. They were the ones doing the real hard work. The immigrants who came, like Hercules Mulligan from Ireland or Alexander Hamilton from St. Kitts and Nevis, they had as much of an impact on this country as any of the other presidents did. And that's supposed to be their story, and that's why it is so important for the story to be told. Not because it is, not to say that this is exactly what happened, that these people were good people, and so on and so forth, and their lives played out like a fairy tale with a tragic ending. It's supposed to be like us recognizing that while we learned about, Jefferson and Washington and Madison, there are these people that we didn't learn about, and they had the real impact on America. And especially the last sort of like half of the musical, where it's like we only have this music, we only have the information because of the women who survived. It's supposed to be saying all these people that we take for granted, all these minorities who rights have been taken away and have just only recently been given back, they're the real reason that America exists. And they're just as important, maybe even more important than the figureheads that we idolize. That's the real message of Hamilton, and is not supposed to be taken as a real history lesson, though there are real history facts in it. A lot of it is made up. Not made up, but it's skewed to one perspective. So it's not objectively true. And a lot of the areas where people are saying it's historically inaccurate, it wasn't actually stated in the musical. It's people's interpretations of why things were done this way, even though they were done for theatrical reasons, not for story reasons. Like, one of the things I've heard the most is in Take a Break, where it's Angelica and Eliza, and he says the Schuyler sisters, and everyone's like, oh, well, Peggy must have died by then. But she wasn't dead. She didn't die until 3 years before Hamilton died, so she wasn't dead until 1801, whereas Take a Break happened in 1792. So she was very much alive. She still had like almost 10 years left of her life. The reason that she wasn't in that scene, in that song, is because the actress, playing Peggy also played Mariah, and she had to do a costume change, and it would have been really hard if she were in both songs in different costumes. That's why she wasn't there. Not because she died, because that's... So a lot of the stuff that is historically inaccurate isn't specifically stated in the musical. It's come up with by the people who are making assumptions without doing research. Now to actually get into personality of the characters versus the history, because it's something that people talk to me a lot about, is that, oh, well, people think that, how Daveed Diggs portrays not Hamilton, but Jefferson, is exactly how Jefferson was, when it's like, no, he wasn't. These people were very bad, very amoral people, You know, remember, this is the guy who said all men are created equal and then owned thousands of slaves, you know? Like, so I think the biggest personality difference would be Hamilton. You know, he's seen as this loving, caring person who likes writing, but really he was kind of like, I mean, he is sort of a hot shot. He's overconfident, overzealous, and he talks too much. But we do portray him in that positive light of, oh, he loves Eliza and he loves Angelica, and oh my God, it was a sign of weakness that he was seduced into doing this terrible act with Mariah, and all these policies he was making was for the greater good. When in reality, if you look back at history, he's more of like the cause of a lot of the issues we have now. His financial system, you know, has been proven to kind of be to our detriment, as it was his idea to assume national debt, and which would have been good. You know, the intent was there, and they tried to pay it back, but he also believed that we needed to be in debt in order to curate economic growth, which obviously is really bad now because we went from being like then in their time millions of dollars in debt, to which now would be we were in billions of dollars in debt, to now being like 13 or so on $1 trillion in debt. You know, we haven't been able to pay it back. Well, one president paid it back, but that's irrelevant. The point is that the whole idea of a national debt, while it was a good idea to try and focus on how taxes to help pay it off, he wasn't the best person to do it. Also because he was, you know, like people who are like womanizers, they objectify women, try and just fuck everybody. That was him. He, I don't know, he's been pretty famous for his letters to John Lawrence, and I read some, and oh my God, like, totally gay. Totally gay. And he's written explicitly that, and basically the only person he's ever really cared about was Lawrence. You know, he's written multiple things about how much he loved him, all these jokes they've had. He said, I'm never going to get married, and if I do, it's only for financial gain because he was poor. And when he does engage to Eliza, he wrote down to Lawrence, he said, he's like, against all odds, I've become engaged to Miss Schuyler. She's not smart, she's not pretty, but she has a lot of money, and the sex is good. He didn't explicitly say that. He actually wrote in between, like, he was switch writing between French and English, which is weird. But you know, in like the old timey way that they talked, that was like the gist of it. Is like, I don't love her, but I'm marrying her for money because I'm broke. And that was also, and also another thing is that we portray all these people as like abolitionists, you know, but honestly, all of them had slaves. Hamilton didn't, he didn't own slaves, but Eliza had slaves. George Washington didn't have slaves, but Martha had slaves, and he actively helped to, you know, actively helped her keep her slaves, so they didn't have to free them. The same thing with Jefferson. Jefferson had slaves. He raped his 13-year-old slave Sally Hemings, who was briefly mentioned in the musical, and she had his children. And the only real good that we give him credit for is that he went and he gave her a room in his house, and we're like, that doesn't make up for the fact that he raped her and actually prevented her from getting her freedom when they were in France. You know, that doesn't make him a better person. He gave her a home in his house, but he didn't free her. He didn't free any of his slaves. He still raped her. He was like 46 and she was like 13 or 16, in that age range. Either way, still rape and whatever. And just the highlight of it, he would go, people did free their slaves. He'd be like, oh my God, you know, you're so great. You're such a good person. Congratulations on freeing your slaves. But he wouldn't free his own. So these people, while they did do a lot of things for our country to our benefit and to our detriment, they fundamentally themselves were not good people. But the musical isn't about that, which is why it didn't include those things in the musical. I think the only thing that would have portrayed it was Cabinet Battle Number 3, which was only a demo, didn't actually make it into the full musical, that would have really portrayed how each person did feel about slavery, because they all did own slaves. Washington, I don't know about Madison, but probably Madison. And it called out, it said, you know, and it did. I think it was one of the more historically accurate songs in the musical, I guess not in the musical, was how they all felt about slaves. And because it did happen, James Madison really did come to an agreement and pass a little like agreement saying slavery is not to be discussed in the White House. And that was true. They could not discuss slavery in the White House after that agreement was passed until 1808, which is why nothing ever got done and why things became progressively worse, and then the Civil War kind of happened. Also, I feel like Mariah Reynolds gets a bad rap. Especially there's this one comedian who made a whole thing about how Hamilton, there was no question of why he cheated on her, she didn't seduce him, and so on and so forth, and why Hamilton's a bad person, which is true, but actually the comedian was wrong, because Mariah Reynolds was with an abusive husband, and he did, make her go and sleep with Hamilton in order for him to blackmail. Like, that was the whole scheme of theirs, and she was sort of put to it because she was 23, she had a kid, and he was, she lived, and she and her kid lived with this man, and he was like, I will, do all these terrible things to you if you don't do it. I'll, like, hurt your kid or so on and so forth if you don't do it. And she felt really bad about it, and right when he was about to, James Reynolds was about to blackmail Hamilton, she sent him a letter and said, hey, this is what's been happening, it's been a scheme the whole time. Please don't give him any money. Come here. We can go and confront him together. You're a big lawyer. You're a big politician, whatever. You can help me. We can arrest him before he does anything. But Hamilton didn't do that. Obviously, he paid and whatever and kept on seeing her. And she was like, oh, God. And so, yeah, I feel like it's not that it's trying to be inaccurate. It's just it's trying to show a certain thing, and therefore pieces are being left out, which is technically like lying through omission, but it's not meant to be historically accurate. Another thing I think that people get caught up in is how fast-paced the musical is, because it is one song after another, and it has to show everything over a series of years, in 2 hours and 30 minutes, where in reality all these things happened over a series of years. Obviously musical starts when he's like 20 and ends when he's 46, so there's a good like 26 years in between the start of the musical to the end of the musical. Which is once again why, even though there are a few key dates set in, it's hard to figure out when everything is happening, because it looks like, oh, he just got appointed to office, and then, oh, he's now cheating on his wife, and then, oh, people just found out about it, but really it's like there was a 5-year gap between when he started cheating and when the Reynolds pamphlet was actually made, and then there was a good 4-year gap between the election of 1800 and then the actual duel that killed him in 1804. And I think that's something that people forget about, is that this is a musical and it's not real, and there are facts that created it, but it is a fictionalized version of what actually happened, and that if they want to know if something is true, they should do their own research before assuming that something in the musical is true. And now, last question that someone asked me is what's my favorite to least favorite songs, and I'd say my top 3 favorite songs would be Nonstop, The Room Where It Happened, and just the opening Alexander Hamilton, because I feel like those portray the most of Hamilton's personality and the real like energy and vibe he has. I think it portrays more accurately the flaws of this human being. The Room Where It Happened isn't really about Hamilton, but that's something else I'll get to later. I like that for a personal reason. Nonstop, it shows that his sort of shutdown after Lawrence died, and his new thing of I have to make sure I am remembered, I have to do all this, I have to keep working, because the one person he really cared for, because we all decided that he didn't really care for Eliza in that sense, has died, and he doesn't know what else to do with himself, and so he's trying to work to make sure he is remembered, and then make sure that Lawrence is remembered, and his work and his abolitionist traits are remembered, so he doesn't just die with nothing. The one thing I'd say that isn't historically accurate about it is being asked to be the Treasury Secretary, because he and Jefferson were both the second option for both of their positions. I think it was John Jay and Henry Knox who were first asked by Washington to hold Treasury of Secretary of Treasury and then Secretary of State, respectively, and then both of them turned it down and suggested the latter, being Hamilton and Jefferson for the positions. It wasn't just Hamilton being, it wasn't just George Washington being like, hey, you're my right hand man, I'm gonna have you be the finance guy. It's like, no, he wasn't even the first one. John Jay was just like, hey, Hamilton's a good idea. And then Henry Knox was just like, oh no. And so George Washington was like, Jefferson. But he was part of the Constitutional Convention, and he did do the Federalist Papers. Those are things that we do know. The reason I like the room where it happened is because it does portray that underlying sense of we don't have a lot of power in the government. The people itself do not have power, and so we are voting for these representatives, but at the same time, these representatives are people, and they can say, oh, we did this, but no one really knows what happened. Also because this does portray a specific meeting that did happen between Jefferson, Madison, and Hamilton that did take place. I think it was like 1793. And it is accurate to say no one knows what happened. There were no records of what happened. All I know is that it did cause the semi-first government shutdown, where it's like two parties can't agree, the government shuts down, nothing happens. This was like the first one. It was the Democratic Republicans and then the Federalists couldn't agree, so the government kind of shut down. This was like the first unofficial one. And it is true that nobody did know what happened. They've had rumors from Jefferson, rumors from Madison, which is why it said Thomas claims, because he said these things, but no one else ever backed them up. No one else ever showed up and said no one else was there, so they have really no idea what was discussed. All I know is that the conclusion was that Washington, D.C. would be where Washington, D.C. is now. The White House, the Capitol would be there, and then the banks would be controlled on Wall Street. That was all that was decided. And so I feel like that is very important because it does show that a lot of times we don't know what's happening. We elect these officials and we feel like we have a say in the government, but we really don't. And that kind of cynicism is something I love. And then Alexander Hamilton, I love that because it hypes up the musical. And it really places like the emphasis of the character, gives the background about why he's fighting, why he has to try and live. Everything is a struggle to him. And it sort of sets up as to why he does what he does. It gives him motive of he's lived this hard life and he's had to rely on himself, and that makes it hard for him to trust anybody. It's like he has all these friends, he has all these people that he loves, all these loved ones, his wife, his sister-in-laws, and so on and so forth, and his children, but the only person he really trusts to do anything with his life is himself. And that leads him to sort of isolating himself from the people he loves and making all these grave mistakes that affect the people around him more than they affect himself. And basically he just started out, and with his mindset, it started out for a good time, as it portrays the musical, that he's strong, he's determined, he's driven, he's smart, he's intelligent, and that only got him so far. But once you get that high point, he kind of peaked right where the intermission is, and then it's like he just kept on hit that thing that was so good and starting the revolution and getting there and getting so far. He didn't know how to do anything else, and that could have dug him into that hole, which inevitably led to his death. And I think that's really interesting, the way they did it, where it's like, yeah, what he's like doing is a good idea, it's a good idea, and then he and Burr kind of just switched roles, where it's like, now Burr's being ambitious, and Hamilton's ambitious, and he's realizing that his ambition only got him so far. And they just sort of clashed, and they both lost a part of themselves that day. Hamilton, his life, and Burr, his credibility. And that's another thing I feel like they misrepresented in the musical, was that Burr was sorry for shooting Hamilton in the musical, but in real life there have been mixed accounts. One of him saying that they wrote up the hospital, asking if Hamilton was okay, and other parts later saying that he would laugh and joke about the fact that he killed Hamilton. And so once again, these people are not, they get people that we portray. Everybody has their good things and bad things that they did, and it isn't meant to be taken like accurately. This isn't supposed to be a history lesson. It's supposed to be a fun, oh, here's how to get people interested in history. Here's how we, as people of color, can take back this bad history by saying we. It's kind of like a fuck you to the founding fathers, being like, now these people that you scorn, these people that you hated, are portraying you, and they're your legacy now. It's like in Jojo Rabbit having a Jew play Hitler. It's kind of like that. It's not only the immigrants have power. Immigrants are important because they shape who America is. It's not just the people of color and these minorities shape who America is. The only reason America is here because of them. It is also because out of all this, what has lasted longer? These old white men's racist and sexist policies, or the heart and determination that keeps bringing these people to America, believing that they have a better life, learning that they don't, and then fighting for it. Just like these immigrants and these people of color have fought for their rights and their freedom, just as the founding fathers fought for their rights and their freedom. It's supposed to say that, yeah, these people are dead and they were bad people, but the spirit of fighting for freedom and fighting for equality never left. Even if it's no longer the white people fighting for it, it continued on in these people who, they're minorities, but they make up the majority of America. I don't know if any of this makes sense. I don't even know if I'm right, but that's just how I feel personally, looking back at it from a theater nerd, someone who loves history, and so on and so forth. This is now a 22-minute long video, and I might make a part 2 on more historical things. If you have any more questions, please, if you want me to make part 2, comment any questions you might have in the comments or DM me. I love talking about this type of shit. Have a great day. Watch Hamilton. It is not a history lesson. Well, it's my history lesson, but it's not meant to be taken at face value. There is so much symbolism, though, in the musical, and it's exquisite, and I love it, and I feel like you should appreciate it as a musical and appreciate the characters and realize that there is a difference between the reality of the historical events and the people than the way they are portrayed in the musical. I love you all. So long. Thanks for all the fish.